Genesis 45 tells the story of Joseph's emotional reunion with his brothers in Egypt. It is a significant chapter in the Joseph narrative, marking the moment when Joseph reveals his identity to his brothers and their reconciliation. Here's a summary of the key events. Before we start, we'd like to ask for your support. If you enjoy our video, please hit the like button. This will help us reach more people and create content for you. Now let's get started with today's video. Genesis 45, Joseph reveals himself to his brothers. Genesis 45 is a climactic chapter in the story of Joseph, one of the most beloved figures in the Bible. This chapter recounts the moment when Joseph, after testing his brothers and observing their changed hearts, finally reveals his identity to them. The reunion is not only an emotional resolution to years of separation but also highlights key themes of divine providence, forgiveness, and reconciliation. The events that unfold in this chapter demonstrate the overarching narrative of God's control over human history, especially within the family of Jacob, the patriarchs of Israel. Context leading up to Genesis 45. To fully appreciate Genesis 45, it's crucial to understand the preceding events. Joseph, sold into slavery by his jealous brothers, Genesis 37, rises to a position of immense power in Egypt due to his ability to interpret Pharaoh's dreams, Genesis 41. These dreams predict 7 years of abundance followed by 7 years of famine. Under Joseph's leadership, Egypt stores enough grain during the good years to survive the famine, which affects not only Egypt but the entire surrounding region, including Canaan, where Joseph's family resides. Joseph's brothers, unaware of his identity, come to Egypt to buy food during the famine. Joseph recognizes them, but they do not recognize him. He decides to test their integrity by accusing them of being spies and demanding that they bring their youngest brother, Benjamin, to Egypt to prove their honesty, Genesis 42. After several dramatic encounters, Joseph becomes convinced that his brothers have repented of their past sins, especially their betrayal of him. It is at this moment, in Genesis 45, that Joseph chooses to reveal his identity to them. Joseph reveals his identity, verses 1 to 4. The chapter opens with an intensely emotional moment. Joseph, overwhelmed with emotion, orders everyone except his brothers to leave the room. This is significant because it shows Joseph's desire for privacy in this personal and vulnerable moment. He does not want to embarrass his brothers publicly, nor does he wish to reveal his identity to the Egyptians just yet. In verse 2, it is said that Joseph wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him, and Pharaoh's household heard about it. Joseph's tears reflect the years of separation, the pain of his past, and the joy of reconciliation. His emotions are raw and powerful, underscoring how deeply he feels this moment. In verse 3, Joseph finally speaks to his brothers in a revelation that would have been shocking. I am Joseph. Is my father still alive? The brothers, however, are terrified or dismayed in some translations. They are unable to respond, likely because of the sudden realization that the man before them, the ruler of Egypt, was the brother they had betrayed and sold into slavery years earlier. Their fear reflects their guilt, as they undoubtedly expect Joseph to seek revenge. In verses 4 to 5, Joseph immediately moves to reassure them. He calls them closer and repeats his declaration, I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. By acknowledging their crime without bitterness, Joseph opens the door for reconciliation. He quickly adds, and now, do not be distressed or angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. Here, Joseph shows extraordinary forgiveness, emphasizing that God had a greater plan in allowing his betrayal and suffering. Joseph's theology of providence, verses 5 to 8. One of the most remarkable aspects of this chapter is Joseph's theology of divine providence. In verses 5 to 8, Joseph explains that it was not his brothers who ultimately sent him to Egypt, but God. Joseph sees the hand of God working through the events of his life, even through the evil actions of others. This perspective allows him to forgive his brothers, as he recognizes that their actions, while wrong, were part of a divine plan to save lives. Joseph's statement, "It was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you," highlights one of the central themes of the Joseph narrative, God's providential care for his people. Joseph's rise to power in Egypt was not just for his benefit but for the benefit of his entire family, the future nation of Israel. God had used Joseph's suffering to bring about the salvation of many people, including his own family. Joseph reiterates this point in verse 8, "So then, it was not you who sent me here, but God." This statement emphasizes that while human beings may act with evil intentions, God can and does work through even the worst circumstances to bring about his purposes. Joseph's ability to see God's hand in his suffering is a model of faith and trust in divine providence. Joseph's invitation to bring Jacob to Egypt, verses 9 to 13. After revealing his identity and explaining God's role in his journey, Joseph urges his brothers to return to Canaan and bring their father, Jacob, to Egypt. He assures them that they will be provided for during the remaining 5 years of famine and that they will live in the fertile land of Goshen, where they can prosper. In verse 10, Joseph specifically mentions Goshen as the place where they will live. This region in northeastern Egypt was ideal for pastoralists, as it provided good grazing land for their flocks. Joseph's invitation is generous, and his concern for his family's well-being is clear. In verses 11 to 13, Joseph repeats his promise to take care of them, emphasizing that there are still 5 years of famine to come. He also encourages his brothers to tell their father about his position in Egypt and the honor he has received. Joseph's words are filled with urgency, as he longs to be reunited with his father after so many years. Emotional reunion and gifts, verses 14 to 24. The next section of the chapter, verses 14 to 15, is one of the most emotional moments in the Bible. Joseph embraces his younger brother Benjamin and weeps on his neck. Benjamin, the only other son of Rachel, their shared mother, has a special bond with Joseph, and the reunion between the two brothers is filled with love and emotion. Joseph then kisses all his brothers and weeps with them. This gesture of affection and forgiveness is powerful, especially considering the betrayal Joseph had suffered at their hands. Joseph's ability to forgive so completely is a testament to his faith in God's plan and his love for his family. In verses 16 to 20, the news of Joseph's reunion with his brothers reaches Pharaoh's palace. Pharaoh is pleased with the reunion and offers Joseph's family the best of the land in Egypt. He orders that they be provided with carts to transport their families and possessions to Egypt. Pharaoh's generosity reflects the favor that Joseph had found in his eyes, as well as Egypt's prosperity under Joseph's leadership. Joseph follows Pharaoh's orders and provides his brothers with carts, provisions, and new clothing. In verse 22, Joseph gives Benjamin 5 sets of clothes and 300 shekels of silver, showing special favor to his full brother. However, unlike earlier in the narrative, when favoritism led to jealousy and strife, the brothers seem to have matured, and there is no indication of resentment over Benjamin's gifts. Before they leave, Joseph warns his brothers, "Don't quarrel on the way," verse 24. This could be Joseph's way of encouraging them to maintain the unity and peace they have found through this reconciliation. Jacob learns the truth, verses 25 to 28. The final section of the chapter describes the brothers' return to Canaan and their revelation to Jacob that Joseph is alive. In verse 26, when they tell Jacob, Joseph is still alive. In fact, he is ruler of all Egypt, Jacob is initially stunned and does not believe them. The Hebrew phrase suggests that Jacob's heart grew numb or fainted, as the news was so shocking that he could hardly process it. However, when Jacob sees the carts and provisions that Joseph had sent, his spirit revives. In verse 28, Jacob declares, "I'm convinced. My son Joseph is still alive. I will go and see him before I die." This marks a turning point for Jacob, who had long mourned the loss of Joseph, believing him to be dead. Now, filled with hope and joy, he looks forward to a reunion with his beloved son. Themes and significance of Genesis 45. Several important themes emerge from Genesis 45. Forgiveness and reconciliation. Joseph's ability to forgive his brothers is central to this chapter. Despite the great wrong they had done to him, Joseph harbors no bitterness and instead focuses on God's greater plan. This act of forgiveness leads to the reconciliation of the entire family, a key moment in the larger narrative of the people of Israel. Divine providence. Joseph's interpretation of his life events through the lens of God's providence is a powerful example of faith. Rather than dwelling on the injustice he suffered, Joseph sees how God used his circumstances to bring about a greater good. This theme resonates throughout the Bible, emphasizing that God's plans are often beyond human understanding but always work toward the fulfillment of his purposes. God's faithfulness to his covenant. The Joseph story is part of the larger narrative of God's covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Through Joseph, God preserves the family of Israel during a time of great famine. This preservation is crucial for the fulfillment of God's promises to Abraham that his descendants would become a great nation. Genesis 12 verses 1 to 3. Please subscribe my YouTube channel. I hope you like this video. Thank you.